The village of Brundulla, nestled among the rolling green hills of northern Italy's Veneto region, was still half medieval in its rhythms when Anna Francesca Boscardin was born on October 6, 1888. To the villagers she would always be Annette, a thin little girl with wide, timid eyes who seemed to move through the world quietly, as if afraid to disturb it. Her family was poor, desperately so. Her father, Angelo, was a man weighed down by poverty and frustration, often finding solace in drink rather than labor. Her mother, Maria Teresa, carried the family with courage and sacrifice, teaching her children the faith and instilling in them an almost instinctive turning of the heart toward prayer. Their home was a modest farmhouse with cracked plaster and the smell of earth and smoke lingering in the air. Annette, small and delicate, learned quickly what hardship meant: mending worn clothes, carrying water from the well, caring for younger siblings, all while her father's sharp voice sometimes filled the room. Yet amid this roughness there was a secret place where the girl found peace: the parish church. She loved to slip inside during the quiet afternoons, when the heavy wooden doors creaked and the faint smell of incense lingered. There she would kneel before the tabernacle, her eyes fixed on the flickering lamp, whispering words that seemed to pour out of her soul. By temperament she was shy and awkward. Other children teased her, calling her la ocie, the goose, because she was slow in speech and hesitant in answering questions. At school she struggled, fumbling over her lessons, red-faced when the teacher scolded her. Her classmates laughed, and her own sense of inadequacy grew. Yet those very humiliations formed in her a patience and gentleness that marked her whole life. What she could not master in books, she carried instead in her heart as a quiet offering to God. Her faith was the secret strength of her youth. Once, as a girl, she was entrusted with the care of a neighbor's little child. She took the baby in her arms and sang softly, a hymn she had heard in church. "Holy God, we praise thy name," she murmured. The neighbor later remarked that although Anna was clumsy in many things, she had a rare gift for calming the restless, for carrying peace into a room. It was an early glimpse of the nurse she would one day become. Sundays were the highlight of her week. She would rise early, slip into her clean but threadbare dress, and hurry to Mass. She adored the Eucharist with a devotion that was already mystical. At her first communion, she later recalled, she felt as though the world melted away and she belonged entirely to Jesus. For days afterward, she spoke little, her eyes shining with a hidden fire. Life at home, however, was less peaceful. Her father's drinking and bursts of anger weighed heavily on the family. Often Anna fled into the fields, where she would pray aloud among the vines and olive trees. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, she was seen kneeling by herself, arms stretched wide like a little crucifix, whispering words of surrender. "Lord," she prayed, "make me patient. Make me your servant." Those who glimpsed her in such moments sensed something extraordinary beneath her quiet exterior, a soul slowly being shaped into a vessel of grace. As adolescence came, her duties increased. She worked in the fields beside her mother, bent over rows of crops, her hands roughened by labor. The villagers noticed her willingness to help anyone in need, no matter how poor or despised. She carried bread to the sick, sat with lonely widows, and once gave away her own shawl to a beggar shivering in the cold. These acts were small, almost invisible, yet they revealed the budding flower of sanctity hidden in the young girl. Still, her awkwardness and lack of education weighed on her. Some advised her not to dream of religious life, saying she was too simple, too incapable. But Anna's heart longed for God. She confided once to her parish priest, "I am not clever, but I want to love him with all I have." The priest, recognizing her sincerity, encouraged her to pray and trust. There were moments of mystical intensity, even in these years. At night, after her family had gone to sleep, she would kneel by her small bed and lose herself in prayer. Sometimes she felt enveloped in a presence so overwhelming she could not speak. She later described it as if Christ himself were standing beside her, asking for her heart. These experiences left her strengthened to face the hardships of the next day. By 1904, when she was 16, Anna began speaking openly about her desire to enter a convent. Her father scoffed at the idea, insisting she would be useless to the nuns. "You can't even read properly," he barked. "What good will you be to anyone?" But her mother quietly encouraged her, whispering, "If the Lord calls you, go." In the autumn of 1905, Anna made the decisive step. She approached the Sisters of St. Dorothy, Daughters of the Sacred Hearts, a congregation devoted to teaching and nursing. The sisters were hesitant at first. She seemed unremarkable, timid, even slow. Yet they sensed her deep sincerity and accepted her. On October 8, 1905, Anna entered the convent at Vicenza and received the name Sister Maria Bertilla. She was 17 years old. Her departure from home was quiet. She carried with her a small bundle of belongings and the hidden fire of a soul determined to give everything to God. As she walked away from Brendela, the field she had known since childhood fading behind her, she prayed aloud, "Jesus, take me as I am. I am nothing, but I am yours." The girl once mocked as the goose had begun a path that would reveal her as a saint. When Anna Boscardin became Sister Maria Bertilla in October 1905, she entered the convent with a mixture of trembling and joy. The convent of the Sisters of St. Dorothy in Vicenza was austere but orderly, filled with the rhythm of bells that marked prayer, study, and work. For the shy village girl, the very structure was a comfort. No more chaotic outbursts from her father, no more taunts from neighbors. Here the rules were clear, the silence purposeful, and her heart could finally belong entirely to God. Yet life was not easy. From the beginning, some sisters judged her harshly. Her slowness of speech, her lack of education, and her hesitant manner stood out in a community where discipline and skill were prized. One superior dismissed her bluntly, "She will be good for nothing except the lowliest tasks." And indeed, at first she was given the most menial chores, scrubbing floors, cleaning laundry, tending the kitchen fire. But Bertilla accepted everything with docility. To her, even washing dishes was a chance to serve Christ hidden in her sisters. Prayer sustained her through these trials. Each morning, kneeling in the chapel, she fixed her gaze on the tabernacle, whispering the same prayer, "Jesus, I am here for you. Use me." She experienced moments of deep mystical consolation during these hours, a sweetness that made the hardships of the day seem lighter. At times she felt as though an unseen hand touched her shoulder, reassuring her that her littleness was exactly what God desired. The turning point came when she was assigned to help in the convent's small infirmary. At first, she was awkward, unsure how to bandage wounds or measure medicine. But the sisters noticed something extraordinary. Patients responded to her presence. Children calmed when she touched their foreheads. The sick who were restless grew quiet when she sat by their beds. She had no formal training yet, but her compassion was instinctive. "You are good at this," one older sister remarked. "Perhaps God is showing you your mission." In 1907, she was sent to Treviso, to the large hospital managed by the Sisters of St. Dorothy. The hospital was a demanding place, full of noise, suffering, and the heavy odor of disinfectant. Bertilla, barely 19, was placed in the children's ward. Here her gift blossomed. The children adored her. She would kneel beside their cots, tell them simple stories of the saints, sing them hymns, and encourage them to pray. One boy, weak from diphtheria, clutched her hand tightly and whispered, "Don't leave me, sister." She stayed by his side for hours, gently fanning his fevered brow, until he finally fell asleep in peace. But not everyone appreciated her. One superior, perhaps jealous of the affection Bertilla inspired in the patients, began to treat her harshly. She scolded her in front of others, belittled her intelligence, and once reassigned her back to menial laundry work. Bertilla, wounded but serene, obeyed without complaint. Her fellow sisters whispered in sympathy, but she simply smiled. "It does not matter," she confided to one. "To obey is to love Jesus." This obedience in the face of injustice became a hallmark of her sanctity. Her reputation as a nurse grew quietly. She was not brilliant, but she was faithful. She cleaned wounds with meticulous care, prayed over dying patients, and never complained of fatigue. During outbreaks of contagious disease, when others hesitated, she volunteered to enter the rooms of the afflicted. "If they are alone," she said, "I want to be there with them." Once, when diphtheria threatened to spread in the ward, she moved from bed to bed, administering treatments with calm determination, though she risked infection herself. It was during these years that her mystical experiences deepened. After long shifts, she would return to the chapel late at night and kneel in the dark before the Blessed Sacrament. Sometimes she remained there for hours, absorbed in silent prayer. One sister later testified that she often saw Bertilla motionless, her face radiant as though lost in another world. On one occasion, Bertilla confided to her confessor that she felt Christ saying, "Do not fear, little one. I am with you in the sick room, as I am here in the tabernacle." Such words gave her courage for the daily grind of hospital service. Her humility remained constant. When praised by a visiting doctor for her dedication, she simply lowered her eyes and said, "I am only doing what our Lord would do." She never sought recognition, preferring to be unnoticed. Yet even unnoticed, her charity could not be hidden. The sick, poor, and abandoned found in her a motherly presence, though she herself was barely out of girlhood. In 1910, she took her final vows, sealing her life to God forever. The ceremony was simple, but for her it was a mystical marriage. Dressed in the white veil of a bride of Christ, she whispered her vows with tears streaming down her face. "Forever, Jesus," she prayed. That night, alone in her cell, she pressed her crucifix to her heart and whispered, "Now I am yours forever. Take me wherever you will." Not long after, she was entrusted with increasing responsibilities in the hospital. The sisters noted her ability to remain calm in emergencies, to endure long hours without rest, and to radiate peace even in the most chaotic wards. Patients sought her out not only for medical care, but for comfort of soul. She prayed aloud with them, encouraged them to trust in God's mercy, and often repeated simple words. "He loves you. Offer him your sufferings, and he will give you peace." One unforgettable story came during a bitter winter night in 1912. A young child, dying of diphtheria, gasped for breath as his desperate mother clung to him. Bertilla, summoned quickly, sat down by the bed. She stroked the child's forehead, murmured prayers, and held his tiny hand. For hours she remained at his side, calming his convulsions with gentle care. At dawn, the boy slipped quietly into death. His mother, weeping, grasped Bertilla's hands and whispered, "You were like an angel to us." Bertilla, exhausted, simply answered, "It was Jesus who was here." By 1914, when the storm clouds of war gathered over Europe, Sister Maria Bertilla had already earned a reputation within the hospital as a hidden saint. The sisters still assigned her humble tasks, the superiors sometimes misjudged her, but among the sick she was a light. Her simple, awkward childhood had flowered into a profound gift to bring Christ's tenderness into places of suffering. And greater trials, as well as greater opportunities for heroism, were soon to come. When war erupted across Europe in 1914, the city of Treviso, where Sister Maria Bertilla was stationed, soon became a place of sorrow. Northern Italy's front lines cut close through the Veneto, and wounded soldiers poured into the hospitals. The tranquil children's ward where Bertilla had worked transformed almost overnight into a scene of chaos and blood. The shrill cries of injured men replaced the quiet whispers of sick children, and the air became thick with the metallic scent of wounds, the acrid sting of disinfectant, and the groans of suffering. For Bertilla, the change was not terrifying but providential. She understood instinctively that this was her mission, to be Christ's presence amid human agony. Dressed in her plain habit, moving swiftly between beds, she became known to soldiers as La Sorella Santa, the Holy Sister. She never called attention to herself. She simply worked with tireless energy, bandaging wounds, cooling fevers, lifting men into clean sheets and whispering prayers into ears dulled by pain. The hospital at Treviso was bombed more than once during the war. On one terrifying night in 1917, German planes dropped explosives that shattered windows and shook the very foundations of the wards. The soldiers, many unable to move, cried out in fear. Nurses and orderlies fled in panic, some rushing to the cellars for safety. But Bertilla remained at her post. She walked calmly through the trembling halls, lantern in hand, speaking softly to the men. "Do not be afraid," she said again and again, bending close so they could hear. "The Lord is with us. Offer him your fear." A wounded captain later recalled that as bombs thundered around them, he saw only the calm figure of the young nun, her eyes raised as though fixed on something beyond the walls. Her serenity stilled the ward, and when the danger passed, the men spoke of her as an angel who had carried them through. The work was endless, the hours merciless. Day and night blurred together. Bertilla was often seen bending over beds long after her shift ended, refusing to rest while anyone was in need. Her superiors sometimes had to order her to stop and eat. Yet even when she obeyed, she ate quickly and without taste, eager to return to the sick. "I am not here for myself," she would say quietly. "I am here for them." Her mystical life deepened in these years. She began to see in each wounded soldier the image of Christ crucified. Once, tending to a young man whose body was broken by shrapnel, she whispered, "You are his brother on the cross." Later she confided to her confessor that while she cared for him, she felt an interior voice say, "What you do for him, you do for me." These experiences gave her strength beyond human measure. Not all her trials came from outside. Within the convent, the same superior who had long doubted her continued to humiliate her. At one point, she was reassigned to menial tasks just as the war's worst wounded were arriving. She accepted in silence, but the hospital's doctors, astonished, intervened. They demanded she be restored to the wards, saying, "She is worth 10 nurses. Her hands save lives." Reluctantly, the superior relented. Her charity extended to the dying in particular. She had a gift for accompanying souls in their final hours. One soldier, racked with fear, clutched her hand and begged, "Sister, I am afraid to die." She bent close, whispered prayers of mercy, and told him of God's love. As he slipped away, a smile softened his face. Afterward, another soldier said, "She gave him courage to die." In 1918, when the Spanish flu ravaged Europe, the hospital was overwhelmed. The illness spread swiftly, killing not only soldiers but civilians. Once again, Bertilla placed herself at the center of danger. She moved between beds filled with gasping patients, wiping brows, offering sips of water, holding hands as fevers raged. Her habit became soaked with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion, but she never stopped. When asked if she was afraid of infection, she replied simply, "How can I be afraid? I am with Jesus." One remarkable incident occurred during this time. A child, abandoned by his family out of fear of contagion, was left dying in the ward. Bertilla took him into her arms, cradling him as though he were her own son. She sang softly, rocking him until his breathing slowed, and he died in peace against her heart. Those who witnessed it said it was as if the Blessed Virgin herself had come into the ward. In the rare quiet moments, she returned to the chapel. There, kneeling in silence, she poured out the sorrows of the day. Sometimes she felt crushed by the suffering she had witnessed. But she always left renewed, as if the Eucharist itself had infused her with fresh strength. "In him I find all I need," she wrote once. "I give him everything, my fatigue, my fears, my life." By the war's end, her reputation had spread beyond the hospital. Soldiers spoke of her with reverence. Families of the wounded called her a saint. Yet Bertilla herself never accepted praise. When someone tried to thank her, she bowed her head and said, "Thank him, not me." The years of war and plague had forged her into a vessel of heroic charity. Still the same shy, awkward girl within, She had been transformed by grace into a fearless servant of the suffering. Her body was weary, but her spirit shone with the quiet radiance of holiness. She had given herself without reserve, but the greatest offering of her life was yet to come. When the war ended in 1918, Treviso and the Veneto slowly returned to fragile peace. But for Sister Maria Bertilla, peace did not mean rest. She continued her work in the hospital with the same quiet determination, now caring for children once more, as well as the lingering wounded who required long recovery. The Spanish flu still cast its shadow, and she remained constantly at the bedside of the sick. By then, many in the hospital already spoke of her as a saint. She, however, never allowed herself to believe such things. "I am only his servant," she said again and again. Yet her own health was beginning to falter. In 1919, she began to feel sharp pains in her abdomen. At first, she ignored them, convinced it was fatigue. But the pains grew stronger, and she was often seen pausing in the middle of her rounds, her face pale, her hand pressed to her side. Still, she never complained. To those who noticed, she smiled faintly and said, "It is only another little cross." Doctors soon discovered she had a tumor, cancer, advancing silently and mercilessly. The news did not shake her. Instead, she accepted it with a serenity that astonished her sisters. "If he wants me to suffer, I suffer," she whispered. "If he wants me to be healed, I am healed. If he wants me to die, I will die. All is his." In this simple surrender, she revealed the depth of her mystical union with Christ. Her illness did not immediately remove her from service. She insisted on continuing her nursing duties as long as possible. More than once, patients found her bent double with pain, but still tending to their wounds. One child, noticing her grimace, asked, "Sister, are you sick?" She answered softly, "Yes, but Jesus is with me, so I am happy." By 1921, her condition worsened. Surgery was attempted, and she submitted with complete trust, praying aloud as she was carried into the operating room. The operation gave temporary relief, but the cancer returned. Now her strength ebbed away, yet she transformed even her weakness into a ministry. Bedridden, she became a source of consolation to others. Sisters who visited her left with renewed courage. Patients she could no longer physically serve still received her prayers. She would clasp their hands and whisper, "I offer my pain for you." Her mystical experiences deepened in these last months. One sister testified that she often found Bertilla gazing at her crucifix for long stretches, her face radiant with peace. She spoke of seeing her suffering as an altar on which she laid herself as an offering to God. "I have nothing to give him," she once said quietly, "except my poor life. So I give him all of it." Her final illness was a school of holiness for the community. Though she grew thinner, weaker, and her voice faded to a whisper, she never allowed despair to enter her room. Instead, she created an atmosphere of calm trust, as though heaven itself hovered near. Nurses and doctors, accustomed to suffering, came to her bedside to draw strength. One remarked, "We came to comfort her, but it was she who comforted us." In the autumn of 1922, her condition became critical. She knew the end was near. To her confessor she said, "I am not afraid. I go to Jesus." On October 20th, she asked for the Eucharist one last time. Receiving her Lord, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Now I am ready." That evening, as the sisters prayed around her bed, she lay motionless, her hands folded on her chest. Her breathing slowed, and a serenity spread across her face. Just after midnight, in the early hours of October 20th, 1922, she surrendered her soul gently, as if falling asleep in the arms of God. She was 34 years old. Her death was immediately felt as the passing of a saint. People flocked to her simple coffin, touching it with rosaries, whispering prayers, and weeping openly. Soldiers who had once known her returned to pay their respects. Mothers of the children she had nursed brought flowers. The people of Treviso spoke of her as our angel. In the years that followed, devotion to her grew rapidly. Reports of favors and healings multiplied, and the memory of her humility and courage spread far beyond the Veneto. Pope Pius XII beatified her in 1952, and in 1961 Pope John XXIII canonized her, holding her up as a model of hidden holiness, of sanctity found in the quiet heroism of daily duty. But even before the Church declared her a saint, the people of Treviso already knew. They had seen her calm in the bombing raids, her tireless service during the flu, her patience under humiliations, her serenity in cancer. They had seen in her a life completely given to God, without reserve. The girl once mocked as the goose had, by grace, become a saint radiant with divine love. In her littleness, she had discovered the greatness of God, and in her hiddenness, she had revealed His glory.